Hi, welcome to putting a flex face in Alfresco, part 3. In part 2, we saw how you could write flex code that would invoke an Alfresco web script to retrieve content and display it in this nice display shelf component that we got from Eli Greenfield. In part 3, we're going to look at the Alfresco side of things. Here's that same space that we were looking at in flex just a moment ago. This is that same space inside the Alfresco UI. It's a space that we created. Under Company Home, we created a space called Employee Data and a space under that called Images. And inside Images, we uploaded this content, that is, these image files. You can view the content and interact with it here in Alfresco, but you see the experience is very different from what we had in the Flex UI. So we want to go from this Alfresco out-of-the-box experience to a Flex experience. How do we do that? Well, we do it with our web script. And let's look at where the web scripts reside, first of all. Web scripts reside inside the Alfresco web app. So here's the root of our Alfresco installation. We have a Tomcat instance inside Alfresco. Of course, Tomcat has a web apps directory. The first web app is Alfresco. As you would expect, there is a webinf directory in the Alfresco web app. The webinf directory, in turn, has a classes directory, which has a templates directory, which has a web scripts directory. And this is where our web scripts go. We create additional subdirectories in here to organize our web scripts. Alfresco has their own under org alfresco. We'll put ours under com Rothbury. And the specific service we want for this application, the specific web script, is going to be employee service. So here's our employee service web script. It consists of these three files: the description XML, the JavaScript, and our free marker template. The free marker template can be written to output the data as an HTML file for display in a browser, or, as we did here, to output XML for consumption by other applications. So let's look at this description.xml. Here's the description.xml. We have a name, which is images API. We have a description, where we could put in a more lengthy description here if we wanted to. And we have a URL. The URL is simply /employee service. And this is what will be used to invoke our web script, is /employee service. And we'll see how that fits in a minute. And then we have the name of our method in curly braces here. The method that we're concerned with right now is getImages. Eventually, we may add additional methods to our employee service, and you'll see how we wrote our JavaScript to be extensible with that in mind. But for now, the only method we have is getImages. Alfresco uses this to understand and describe our web script. So if we go back to Alfresco and we look at the service directory, this is web scripts home, alfresco/service. We can click browse all web scripts, and here is the web script we were just looking at, our employee service script. And see, here's the part of the URL that we specified, employee service/getImages. Alfresco knows enough to append that onto alfresco/service. And the HTTP method we're using here is get. And here's the other information we had in our description XML in a more user-friendly format. So here we can use this URL to invoke our service and see the output, employee service/getImages, and here's the output. Here's the XML that gets output when our service is invoked. You see the XML has a root element of images, and inside the root element there's a list of image elements. Each image element has a file name child and a file path child. And this is what gets consumed by our Flex application in order to display those images. Let's go back to our web script. Here's our JavaScript. The first thing our JavaScript does, it creates and assigns these variables. We could do this differently, but because this is written to be extensible, we have these variables up here. We have company home /employee data. We recognize that from what we looked at in the Alfresco UI, company home employee data. And then we have the images folder name, which is images. So if we concatenate this all together, we'll have company home /employee data /images. We'll see that in a minute. So we declare and initialize these variables here, and then we have this try and catch block. This is the next thing to get executed. And the try block, what we do is we see if getImages is our URL.extension. What we're really checking to see is the getImages method being invoked here. URL.extension is whatever comes after the name of our service, in this case employee service. So if it's employee service slash get images, then we're going to do something. Otherwise, we'll just throw an error because the only method we're supporting right now is get images. So let's assume it's the get images method. In that case, we're going to invoke our list images JavaScript method. And we're going to take whatever's returned by list images and assign that as the value of model.resultSet. Model.resultSet is Alfresco syntax. We'll look at the significance of that in a minute. But now let's look at our list images method. List images. The first thing it does, it gets the node that we need. And it does that by invoking our method getRepoRoot and passing the name of the folder that we need. Again, this is written to be extensible. We could do this all in the same method, but in order to make this more flexible and more extensible, we separated it out to a separate method. And getRepoRoot essentially concatenates our path names together to the full path, and it loops over the various elements in the path to either retrieve or create nodes. And here's a nice thing about it. If the node doesn't already exist, it invokes the createFolder method to create the node, so that we can take this script and give it to somebody else who can then drop it in their instance of Alfresco, and the first time they run the script, it will create the spaces for them. It will create the employee data slash images spaces for them, so they don't have to create those spaces themselves. The spaces will be available for them to upload their own content. After looping over all the nodes, it returns the final node, the last node, which is the one we want. It's the target node. So now we have our target node, photos folder, we're calling it. So now we have another variable called searchResult, and searchResult is photosfolder.children. That is to say, the contents of our photos folder. But we're going to want to do something with this, so we have an array, an empty array. And we'll loop over the contents of our photos folder, and for each piece of content in our photos folder, we're going to check to see if it's a GIF, a JPEG, or a PNG. And if it is an image file, then we'll add it to our photos array. So now we have an array of images, and we'll return that array of images. What happens when we return it? Remember the syntax down here. Model.resultSet equals whatever is returned by list images. In this case, our photos array. So our photos array becomes the value of model.resultSet. Alfresco then does the work of passing this value over to our free marker template. Here's our free marker template. You'll recognize this XML structure. This is the XML output we looked at before, the XML output of our web script. The root element is images, and it contains a list of image elements, each of which has a file name and a file path child. Look at this free marker syntax. Hash list. What that's saying is loop over what? The result set that we got from JavaScript and passed to this free marker template by Alfresco as node. Each element we're going to call it node. So inside our image tags we have the file name equals node.name. For our file path, we have this Alfresco path to our spaces store, and after our spaces store we have node ID / node.name. Node ID is used internally by Alfresco. It's a global unique ID that's assigned to each asset inside the repository. So we have node ID / node.name, and that's it. This will generate the XML that we need in order to get it from Flex. Here's our URL in Flex, which remember we hard-coded in there, employee service / get images, and that will get us the XML that we need to display these images. And again, a much different experience than what comes out of the box. Here's the out-of-the-box experience, and here's the Flex experience. Thank you for watching Putting a Flex Face in Alfresco, Part 3.